Welcome to another episode of Electable. I'm Deb Chubb, and this is a podcast sponsored by the Indiana Women's Action Movement. And this is just a huge thrill for me today to be joined by Dr. Jennifer McCormick. You are such a vital person in the educational story, at least of the last 4 years, as you served in the Superintendent of Schools position. An elected position, and a position that you were elected to as a Republican. And so I first want to ask you if you could give us a little bit more information about your background. Your story is so incredible as to your recent departure from the Republican Party. And so I would just love to hear more about you and how you came to this position.
So first of all, thank you for having me back. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to help inform and to advocate for our students in our public schools. So thank you for that. As far as my background goes, I attended public schools at Newcastle K through 12. I went on to attend several public universities and became a teacher. I taught for 10 years, both in general education and special education. I was an elementary principal and then went on to serve as a local superintendent for 7.5 years before jumping into that political arena. And I always said I was not a politician. I was an educator that just happened to land there. But I did serve as state superintendent for 4 years through one term. I'm proud to say that I'm the last elected. I wish there were more elected, but I am proud to say I was the 44th, and the people selected me to do that job. I took it very seriously. I approached it in a very nonpartisan, not just bipartisan, but really a nonpartisan that, one for all and all for one for kids. And so that's a little bit about my background, but it's very laden with public school, and a lot of philanthropic. Grew up in a household that's what you did. You served and you helped others and you fought for those who needed assistance. And so that brought me to really where I am today.
Well, and that's, you mentioned it briefly, the notion that now one of the latest, I don't know what to call it, bad things, I'll just say, that the supermajority Republican legislature has done to education is to change the superintendent position to a non-elected position, an appointment by the governor. Just another really kind of control attack on education. We've seen this now for many years. In Indiana, we were one of the leaders in charter schools in the country, and really shifting public funds, ultimately from public school to privately operated schools, some for profit, some nonprofit. And I know that's something that you really worked hard to try to slow down while you were the superintendent. But now we've got all kinds of new movements to attack public schools. And I really want to get your insight on that. Of course, we know that the last legislative session, more opportunities were provided to allow public funds to go to private, religious, or just private for-profit schools. And it expanded that opportunity, I hate to say all the stages, because at first, remember, it was just going to be this innovative thing. And, we're just going to have these few charter schools that we're going to, innovate and find these great educational programs. And then, we can then use them and implement them in the public schools. And it will just be this little kind of, test school. And then, of course, it just went from there to, everywhere. And then finally now, then it was just it's for low income families, so they should have a choice. Well, now, of course, it's expanded to everybody, and all of that public money is going to private schools, which is dangerous. And of course, we know they have separate standards. But so now the Republican majority, supermajority in Indiana, on a national level too, I think is really putting together this movement now. The latest attack is to upend school boards. So we've seen it. So tell us what your take on this is. This is just incredible what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. So I go back to two of the basic foundations, and a lot of people are doing some really great work in this space right now to just our democracy. So let's look at big picture. Are obviously access to voting, and then obviously our votes to count. And the other piece of that is, which many would argue, is public education. And the supermajorities, really red states, really conservative states, and I would lump Indiana right in there with that, are really using every avenue they can. And COVID has presented some opportunities for them to go after that public education piece and set an urgency for change. And it's really sad. We used to have communities that would support their school boards, and you wouldn't have much attendance because the trust was there at a school board meeting. They supported their superintendents, they supported their principals. And there's a lot of frustration around just the whole pandemic and how it's been handled. I really think our schools have been put in a horrible, horrible situation, but there are people who have taken advantage of it to uproot public schools and to even uproot the voting issue and to uproot who serves, who is the voice for kids through the school boards. And so I do think, unfortunately, we may see some legislation come that would make you have to declare a political party in order to even run, which right now it's not a partisan. And we always say, it needs to be about kids and not about politics. But I do think some things are happening and things are moving based upon legislators are going to take advantage of the situation, that you do have just an enormous amount of frustration across the state on how the pandemic was handled, and very polarizing opinions. And when there's a lack of leadership, it festers out of control. And I think that's where we are. And it is very unfortunate, but I do think you are correct. Our school boards are definitely at risk right now.
That's wild. And so, the other issues too, besides the COVID response that are coming up in these attacks on school boards is the social emotional learning. I come from early childhood education. So of course, that's my jam, as young people say. So social emotional learning, that's what we did in early childhood. That was our big focus. And so, and I had always been a proponent of adding that to K-12 education. I really felt like it was needed. And a lot of that is in response to the COVID pandemic, because everyone saw, at least at the national level, that children suffered emotionally from, being out of school. And now we're seeing these groups of, I don't know where they're coming from. It is definitely a national movement. It is not a homegrown movement. That is clear. One simply has to look at the website for some of these organizations to see that this is not a homegrown movement. And they are coming in and they're really arguing about social emotional learning. Like, that is not a good idea suddenly. And it has to do with, of course, this made up issue about critical race theory, which I'm sure you know better than anybody is not a thing in K-12 education. But it goes beyond that. It's if you've looked at our Indiana State Attorney General's parent rights letter, of course, much of it is things that parents have now. They, of course, I want to find out what are my kids learning. Well, of course you can do that. That's not a problem. But a lot of it is also kind of a motion to say, I don't want my child learning about LGBTQ stuff. And I don't want my child learning about, actual racial injustice in this country. So what is your feeling about those attacks as well?
That goes back to it starts and stops with leadership. And when we were in office with the Department of Education, we embraced with a lot of external partners at the university level, through organizations, through other state agencies, a lot of what I'm really proud of. And it was a group team effort by far. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of people that really did some amazing work in the area of SEL, the social emotional learning and the behavioral piece. A lot of resources were up, a lot of standards were set that really embraced that. We have some statistics in Indiana that should frighten folks regarding, kids and suicides that have actually been attempted and suicides that have actually gone through. We have a lot of conversations we can have with mental health and access to good, solid mental health for all ages. But we were really having some good, honest conversations to really look at that data and say, what are we going to do about this? This trend is out of control, and you certainly don't want to be top 3 in the nation in the statistics that we're in. But you have to have some leadership that will support that. Since we've gone out of office, out of the department, those resources are not even accessible to schools. And so there's a lot of pieces to this that are not being, schools were empowered and now they're being restricted. And it is a national movement. You are correct. People came out of the woodwork. A lot of it's coming out of the Chicago area, some groups, some of it's coming from Illinois or Ohio. So there are different areas that those groups are coming from. They're sending some quite interesting, nasty demands directly to teachers with canned letters. And it's not healthy. At some point, Indiana's going to wake up and say, either we address this in an honest fashion or we listen to the political posturing of what's happening by the extreme right. And it's just a dangerous place to be. But the kids are the ones who are caught in the middle of it. What's unfortunate is educators get a little nervous about what can I teach, what can I not teach, what are the consequences to that. And some of that's very muddy right now. And that's exactly where they want us to be, because when you are unclear of consequences, people become paralyzed. So, you have a lot of schools that are doing some really amazing work and are going to proceed and say, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But you also have some that are starting to slow that train because of hesitancy. And I understand why. They just don't know the unknown consequences. And in Indiana, sometimes those can be quite heavy.
We did see that just recently, and I apologize for not remembering which school district it was, but wait, it's almost coming to me. It's near Fort Wayne, but not Fort Wayne. A school corporation there had a complaint about a teacher who hung a rainbow flag outside her classroom door to indicate that this was a safe space to talk about if you had questions about LGBTQ issues or wanted to talk to someone about it. This was a safe space. And a parent complained that there was this flag hanging there. And so the school corporation took it up and lumped that into a category of what they called political speech, and voted at least. And I don't think it's really finalized yet. I think there's still an opportunity to hopefully come, sanity to prevail. But at this point, the school is removing those sorts of things and not allowing what they're calling political speech, which is just shocking to me. I think that issue, LGBTQ plus issues, have long since been accepted as really non-political, really just about who you are, who you love, and it's frightening to see that kind of being pulled back into controversy. So we did see that, and that was unfortunate. And again, it's the movement you just described too. It's this kind of out of state, nationalized information that's coming into Indiana. We saw this in the last election too in Indiana. As you know, I worked with a lot of terrific, outstanding state legislative candidates, and that was one of the lessons we learned, was that we were fighting against a nationalized messaging that was just somehow, it felt like an insulated stream of this messaging and information coming from the national level to voters in Indiana. And it was really difficult to get through to people, to get through to voters and really just get to know them and to get them to know the positions of our candidates. So, next year is an election year. And so I would love to hear your commentary on what you think we should look for in this next election cycle. But first, I want to ask you to tell us the story about your exit from the Republican Party. I think that was quite recent, in the last 6 months or so, or a year. And so, that's an important story. I think you came in as a Republican, you tried to work with Republicans, and you had an authentic struggle, based on solid issues that I think led you to make this change. And so I would like for you to talk more about that.
Yeah, so when I ran for office, people who had looked at my voting past, because that's all political, or it's all public, it was very checkered. I had always voted for the leader that I felt could get the job done. If they were Democrat, they were Democrat. If they were Republican, they were Republican. But I always voted for the leader that I thought was making some sense, that had some good ideas, that understood having a good team around them, and that was people centered. And so I was very open about that. But when you have to declare an office to run, I declared Republican to run. And so what I learned quickly is there's such a push, and I don't know if this is true statewide to the local Republicans, but such a Republican push as a party that's really a struggle against a lot of things that I held as a value. For instance, public education, health access, and affordable health care, taking care of infrastructure, taking care of those who need it the most. And I was watching what was happening at the federal level with President Trump. I was watching how people were supporting his actions and behaviors and rhetoric. And then their messaging was getting, in my opinion, more and more ridiculous. And I was like, who would be associated with this? So I struggled with that because I knew that association when you're in a political office is huge. But probably the thing that sent that over the top was when I decided to do a bipartisan tour with Senator Melton. And he's from Gary, Indiana, serves on the Ed Commission, and has always been very active in supporting public schools. He's like, let's go across the state and ask some questions. Well, that didn't take very long for the Republican Party to jump all over that there were alternative motives. And at the time, Senator Melton was not running for governor. I was not interested in getting on a ticket of any sort. I was just trying to be bipartisan, given what was happening at the national level. I thought it was a good role model piece for people to see that it can happen and it should happen, and this is how it could look. We had great turnout, great feedback. People really appreciated it, except for the Republican Party leadership. And they quickly came out and questioned my Republicanism and the whole thing. And it just got ridiculous. And honestly, it didn't bother me because I didn't care. I was more concerned about serving kids and serving the people that had elected me. And I wasn't in there to make friends. And I certainly wasn't looking to, get a gold star from the Republican Party. So I simply didn't care. And we moved on, and they just really never let it go. And I never really had a huge support from the party to begin with because I was too pro public education, and it accelerated. I was very open to whomever wanted to come into the Department of Education and ask questions. I didn't care about political affiliation. We provided data to everyone. And that is not the way that it works. And I learned that quickly. So just looking at the totality of it, I just had to question, like, am I going to be affiliated with this? And for me, it was an easy, there's an alternative to that. And it was the Democrats were doing good work. I loved who they were running, some really great candidates. There was a lot of alignment, as far as my ideology. And so I was excited, and I thought, I need to need to make that switch. So for me, it was an easy decision, and I don't look back. And I'm hoping that the Democrats can gain some momentum. Indiana's hard, but they've got some great candidates and keeping people out and getting some fundraising going and some messaging. And I think they're on the right track.
Oh, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about what you foresee for the 2022 elections.
Yeah, I think you hit on one already. I think we're going to probably see something with school boards. I'm not sure what exactly that will look like. And what's really unfortunate is I've had some school board higher up members who are actively involved at the state level. And they're like, look, this is retaliatory. This is based upon, we did resolutions at the local level, and the legislators are upset. And I thought, how sad that school boards exercised the right of what they had to represent their kids, in which the people voted them to do. And now there's backlash, and they're threatening to take away their powers, or to take away their authority, or to make them declare a party to even run. It's hard enough to get people to run for school board, let alone when you throw a political twist in that. There's not a lot of appetite for that. So that piece, unfortunately, I'll be shocked if we don't see something come up. It's not a budget year, so that's always quite interesting, but they're going to have to tackle something with teacher licensing, because we are still operating in such a shortage, just like the rest of the industries across the board. But when you are having schools start school with 15 teachers down and there's no subs, it is beyond a crisis. that I think we're going to see something happen in. I do think there's going to be somewhat of a push, hopefully, from some support, but also I think the unfortunate thing is the counter to that regarding SEL. I think something will come up surrounding that. Some voter pieces. I still think that's going to hang out there as far as how does that look around voter education, civil rights education, some of that, the pieces to that. I think that's going to get quite interesting. So it's going to be, I think, a fast session, but I also think too, it's going to be laden in a lot of things we're seeing at the national level. So, it's people are doing a lot of homework, getting geared up, but I don't know if it's going to be exactly kind to public schools.
And so can I ask, what do you see as your role in 2022?
So for me, I've always said I will help, obviously not a lobbyist, but I've always said I will answer questions and I will help. My big concern right now is, which is no surprise to people who are in the public school trenches, is I think there's a couple key points that we should be paying attention to. And I think legislation could help, because I don't think you can legislate your way to state successes. I think there are ways it can help, but we are so policy heavy in Indiana, and many of them are unproductive and have a lot of unintended or intended consequences. But I think tracking like the class of 2020 for the economic workforce piece, the class of 2025, which are our current freshmen, I think you have a whole group of kids in there that would be a fascinating study regarding, they have now heard the message loud and clear. Do not trust your teachers. Do not trust your superintendents or your school board or your policemen or your doctors or your scientists or your ministers. The list goes on. And we sit and we think back at that, and it's like that formative years they've been through 3 consecutive disruptions of school years. That freshman class needs to have an interesting study piece. Our 5th grade, the current 5th grade, the class of 2029, because they got transferred into content under very difficult circumstances. And then our class of 2031, which is our current 3rd graders who are reading foundations, I'm hearing a lot of concerns. So just that academic focus piece related to a lot of things as far as learning loss, trying to help with some of that leading into that 2022 is like, let's be smart about this. If we're going to have legislation, let's be smart. So giving a lot of input and feedback and trying to support really great candidates, and I'm getting ready to speak to the Henry County Democrats. And I've had a lot of people say, hey, we don't live there, but we're coming. And I think that's good too, just trying to get people energized to listen and make sure people are informed. And I'll continue to work hard for our educators and for the kids and just our public schools as a whole.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. You have such intelligence and background and experience and really innovation to bring to this topic and to Indiana. So I hate to do it, but I always feel like I have to thank people for staying in Indiana. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being in Indiana.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So I guess I want to ask you too, what do you see if you were this, state superintendent of schools, and we had an administration that supported you, what would be your next step?
I think the potential for that could be amazing. I mean, I know in Indiana, careful what you wish for. The governor and the legislators really wanted that Department of Education and that K-12 responsibility under their umbrella, and they got it, and it's there. But what are we hearing from them? So I've not heard the governor talk about K-12 education unless I've completely missed it in some time. And so where are those conversations, in fact, about just like the grades that I just brought up? I mean, there's so many conversations that should be happening with the help of mental health experts, with academic experts, with a lot of people that are really, really smart inside of Indiana and outside of Indiana to say, we can't sit around and wait on consequences and see what happens. We need to look at what are we projecting to happen, or what are some ways we can help with that. But such an amazing opportunity to support schools, to guide schools, to make sure they have the resources they need, but also just to inform the average citizen of what is happening in education in Indiana. And if it were a great alignment and there was a real commitment and priority from a governor on K-12, I think the potential could be quite amazing for any state where it's done well. And I've seen it happen, and it's quite impressive, but too often, unfortunately, I've seen it where if someone gets that power over K-12, it's pretty suppressed, out of sight, out of mind, because you need to push the privatization. And that is very unfortunate.
Right. So, and one thing we also didn't talk about much, and I would like to get your opinion on, is really teacher education. As you mentioned, big shortage everywhere, big shortage, like you said, in all industries right now of staff. But at the last session, I believe there was kind of a loosening of requirements, allowing teachers to get their license a little easier. Correct me if I'm wrong. I may not have passed, but I remember a discussion of that sort of legislation. And so I wonder what your comments are on that whole kind of strategy to increase the number of teachers that we have, and what would be your strategy?
Yeah, I think it starts with higher education and some really hard conversations about, I don't want to bring down the rigor of any program because it does no one any good, not the person in the class, not the educator or the students or the families or the community. However, we're in a situation where we have no one. We have no one who's formally trained. We don't have subs who sometimes are slightly trained. I mean, we are very, very limited on who's playing a big role in the education of our kids. And sometimes that works out, but more times than not, it's not a good situation. When you put someone in who says, I wasn't very good in math in high school, and you're like, well, you're the calculus teacher for a bit. You can only imagine how that's going to play out. And so, but that's, unfortunately, I hear stories like that all the time, where someone will tell me, I was put in a physics class and I didn't even take physics. I've never taken physics. And so, but when you have to hope for the best because there's just no one applying or no one in the trench or no one even in the pipeline, it's a problem. So a real candid conversation with higher ed, and I'm not putting the blame there. I just think it's going to take a partnership to say, we're going to have to completely rethink this, where we keep it to a quality program, but let's be realistic, where we can get some folks into those classrooms that have knowledge about content and enjoy kids. That's step one.
Yeah.
And also understand what's at stake. And so I think it is, and Indiana's not alone, but boy, I would argue it's beyond a crisis at this point. It's pretty bad.
Man. All right. So, okay, great. So thank you so much. I love talking to you. You are such a wealth of great information, and I've just so appreciated you. I remember the first time I saw you speak, once you became a superintendent, I knew nothing about you, and I thought, oh, it's a Republican in there. And I was so impressed, and I was just blown away by your commitment to data, your commitment to studying, and your commitment to really just bettering education for kids. So I'm so happy to get this chance to talk to you, and I really hope to see more of you in Indiana and in politics. I think this is a great opportunity for you, and I think a great opportunity for our state.
Well, I appreciate it. I believe in kids. I believe in what we're trying to accomplish with public education, the inclusivity and the role it plays in just our democracy. And so I'll continue to fight for that, but I do appreciate the kind words and appreciate everybody who's in it for the good fight.
All right, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McCormick. I hope we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much.